Hey guys! Tonight, we're stepping into a story that starts with fog. Thick, pale gray Oregon fog that clings to your sweater like a second skin. You're standing on a lonely coastal bluff, sea breeze tugging at your sleeves, waves grinding against ancient stone. And right beside you, well, technically, inside you, is a man trying to breathe again after 12 years behind bars. Dr. Marcus Layton, once a trusted anesthesiologist, now a paroled convict with a memoir no one wants to believe. You open the book in your hands. The title practically hisses, "A Crime That Never Happened." He wrote it himself. Every sentence is his gasp for air. This isn't the kind of bedtime story with dragons or magic swords. But don't get too comfortable. You probably won't survive this one with your moral compass intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit beside Marcus as the mist creeps inland. He doesn't talk much, just stares at the horizon like it owes him something. After a while, you ask him why he came back here, this quiet Oregon town, where half the locals still think he's a murderer. He shrugs. I didn't come back for them. I came back for the version of me that existed before all this. It's poetic. Sure, but also kind of nuts. Because the truth is, this man didn't just survive 12 years in prison. He survived something messier. The weight of a verdict stamped with finality, a verdict. He insists, built on coincidence, heartbreak, and a story everyone was too eager to believe. You trace the edge of his memoir with your thumb. The first line hits like a sledgehammer. This was a trial that should have never taken place, a verdict that should never have been passed, and above all, the story of a man convicted for a crime that never occurred. Historians still argue whether memoirs from convicted criminals should be treated as primary sources or just elaborate PR campaigns. But Marcus's story, it reads less like spin and more like a desperate confession. Or maybe a dare? He turns towards you suddenly. Want to know the worst part? He says, it wasn't the trial or the press. It was that tiny window in the prison infirmary, the one no bigger than a toaster slot. I'd watch that sliver of sky and wonder if Lena had seen it too before she went. You don't ask what he means. Not yet. Instead, you follow him down a gravel path toward an old boathouse. Every creak of wood, every gull cry, feels like a ghost calling roll. There's a historical marker nearby, detailing the fishing industry boom in the early 1900s. Did you know Oregon once had over 250 canneries up and down its coast? They shipped salmon to Europe in little tins with illustrated labels. Pacific Gold, Seaside Delight. But the marker's rusted now, much like Marcus's past. Inside the boathouse, he's stashed boxes, clippings, transcripts, old photographs with frayed edges. You lean in and find a yellowed newspaper. Doctor's double life. Widower marries again after wife's mysterious death. There's his face, clean-cut, spectacled, and strangely serene. The kind of guy who looks like he teaches chemistry at a suburban high school, not someone accused of killing two people with surgical precision. You sit on the floor as the tide breathes beneath the boards. Want the beginning? Marcus asks. I mean the real beginning, not the courtroom stuff, not the bookshelves. Back when I was just a scrawny Irish kid from Southie trying to keep his shoes dry. You nod. He sighs, and like a reluctant tape recorder, he begins. 1934, Boston. The kind of neighborhood where everyone knew your last name and your business. My dad shoveled coal for 30 years. My mom cleaned the cathedral stairs on Fridays. I had 3 shirts and a school bag held together with duct tape and defiance. He chuckles, but there's no joy in it. Every teacher said the same thing. That Marcus kid's going somewhere. I guess they were right. Just didn't know where. You imagine a skinny boy with thick glasses, hunched over library books while neighborhood kids played stickball outside, and there's something noble about it, isn't there? That climb, that hunger. Quirky fact. In 1940s Boston, one of the city's most prestigious science fairs was held inside a converted trolley barn. The prize was a used microscope and a photo in the Boston Globe. Marcus won it in 48 with a paper on gas diffusion. That's when I knew I wanted to work with the invisible, he mutters. Gases, anesthetics, the things people don't see but feel. You realize, uneasily, how perfect that sounds now. Back on the beach, the tide is retreating. You and Marcus return to the bluff where this strange night began. He pauses there, arms crossed. She deserved better than me, he says finally. You're not sure if he means Lena or Miriam, or maybe both, maybe neither. The memoir sits heavy in your lap. Not just paper and ink, but pages lined with implication. Fog coils once more around your ankles, and somewhere far off, a bell tolls. You sit cross-legged in the boathouse, the air thick with salt and mildew, as Marcus unfurls the reel of his childhood. Not the sanitized version in his memoir, the one polished for publishing, but the raw, chipped paint one. Full of scraped knees and secondhand shoes. You know, he starts, voice softer now. My father didn't believe in books, thought they made a man soft. Said if your hands weren't cracked by supper, you hadn't earned your bread. You picture a narrow, 3-story house in South Boston. Its wood siding perpetually needing paint, the front steps slick with snow half the year. Inside, a wiry boy with oversized knuckles traces medical diagrams in a borrowed textbook by the light of a flickering bulb. My escape plan was the library. Marcus continues. Did you know Boston's public library system was the first in the U.S. to allow people to borrow books without paying a cent? Radical idea back then. Still feels radical. Honestly, it becomes clear quickly. This kid wasn't built for the docks or the mills. He was all neurons and nosebleeds. The kind of kid who memorized Latin anatomy terms before he learned to shave. Historians still argue whether post-World War II Boston offered real upward mobility for working-class immigrants or if it just dangled the illusion of it. Either way, Marcus caught the bait. By 16, he was tutoring older boys in chemistry and winning science fairs with experiments that involved copper sulfate and melting things his mother needed for dinner. I once lit our porch on fire trying to prove a theory about combustion. Got grounded for a month. Worth it. He smiles faintly. College wasn't a question of if, but how. His grades were perfect. His teachers were exasperated and a little in awe. The obstacle wasn't aptitude, it was money. So, Marcus worked. Nights mopping hospital floors. Weekends filing patient charts in basements that smelled like disinfectant and linoleum. It was there between the janitor's closet and the morgue that the idea of becoming a doctor took root. Not a flashy surgeon, not a pediatrician. Something quieter, something precise. Anesthesiology. He says, almost reverently, the science of control. You bring someone to the edge of death, hold them there, and then gently bring them back. It's poetic. You shiver. That particular brand of poetry doesn't land well anymore, given what followed. But back then, it was noble. In 1954, he entered medical school on a partial scholarship and a prayer, surrounded by trust fund kids with cufflinks and confidence. Marcus kept his head down. He rented a tiny studio apartment above a bakery. His mattress was older than he was. Mice occasionally joined his study sessions. He once aced a pharmacology exam after pulling a double shift emptying bedpans. Quirky historical tidbit. The 1950s were a golden age for pharmaceutical innovation. Valium, halothane, and lidocaine all hit the market within a few years of each other, and anesthesiology was evolving fast, shifting from chloroform-era guesswork to precise gas balances and neuromuscular blockers. Marcus was riding the crest of that wave, and then came Lena. He doesn't describe her like a man talking about a ghost. He talks like she's still just down the hall, humming something French, while measuring out beakers of clear liquid. She had a brain like lightning, he says. Fast, brilliant, and dangerous to get too close to. They met in the university's pharmacology lab, surrounded by chalkboards scribbled with chemical formulas and forgotten coffee mugs that smelled like mold. Her laugh could shatter glassware, he adds, in the best way. Lena Moreau, daughter of a French-Canadian professor and an American schoolteacher, was on track to become one of the youngest certified pharmaceutical researchers in the state. She and Marcus started as lab partners and became something less clinical within weeks. She challenged him, corrected his dosages, mocked his taste in jazz, and when he confessed he once considered becoming a priest, she nearly cried laughing. Historians still argue whether women like Lena, intensely educated, fiercely independent, were truly accepted in mid-century medical communities, or merely tolerated. What's certain is that Lena didn't care. She carved her space with skill and sarcasm, and when she said yes to Marcus's proposal in the spring of '57, she added, "But only if we keep separate bookshelves." They married in a courthouse with 2 witnesses and a bottle of terrible champagne. For a few years, it was blissfully boring. Shared shifts, cheap red wine, arguments over the thermostat. They rented a modest house near the hospital and adopted a cat named Dalton after the atomic theory guy. Children came quickly, 2 daughters in 4 years. Marcus doesn't say their names aloud, but he traces them in the air with invisible fingers. And then, just when the rhythm seemed permanent, it didn't. It started with palpitations, a tightness in the chest, then fatigue so deep it made him forget his own name during a morning round. The diagnosis came like a sucker punch: severe dilated cardiomyopathy. His heart was ballooning, weakening. "You're too young for this," the specialist said, eyes lowered. "But it's real." Marcus had to quit. No more 16-hour hospital days. No more long surgeries or adrenaline-fueled emergencies. Just long walks, deep breaths, and early retirement. "I was 30 and already a ghost in a cardigan," he says. Their savings weren't enough. Lena tried to return to work, but regulations had changed. She needed to recertify. Her first attempt failed. Stress settled into the house like mold, so they moved. A new start. Coastal Oregon, where the air was clean, the community small, and hope, supposedly, came easier. Marcus looks out the boathouse window, eyes glistening. "If I died back then," he says, "this story wouldn't have needed writing." You don't reply, because he's right. You wake early in the memory before the birds, before the breeze starts flipping laundry on the line, and you're back in that small Oregon town in 1960. The Layton family has just moved in. A faded yellow house with peeling trim, a garden overtaken by moss, and optimism clinging to every unpacked box. Inside, Marcus tries to smile. You're him now, and it's exhausting. You pretend the salt air will help your heart. That Lena won't notice how slowly you climb stairs. That your girl's still so young, still so easily dazzled, won't sense the pressure beginning to splinter the foundation beneath your perfect little life. Mommy's taking a test today. Your youngest announces over cornflakes one morning, and you nod. Because Lena is trying. Again, the state medical board is stricter now. The recertification exam includes new pharmacological protocols, case studies, and regulations that didn't exist when she last worked. She studies late. Books and index cards spread like puzzle pieces across the kitchen table. You offer encouragement, but your voice feels hollow even to you. She fails. Again, historians still argue whether gender bias played a role in the recertification process of the 1960s. Officially, standards were universal. Unofficially, Lena came home in tears, whispering about condescension and questions designed to trip her up. So she stops trying, gets quiet. You both get quiet. Money thins. Investments meant to fund retirement, small real estate ventures, and stock options. Marcus chose back in Boston. Crumble in a market hiccup. You stare at bank statements like they've betrayed you personally. There's a joke Marcus made once that even now haunts the edge of your thoughts. What's the difference between a doctor and a magician? At least the magician still has an audience when the trick goes wrong. Quirky fact. In 1965, one of the most popular financial scams in small-town America was the land bank scheme. Investors were promised stakes in unzoned, undeveloped land that would soon become the next Palm Springs. Marcus had bought into one near Bend. It turned out to be a dried-up patch of tumbleweed and disappointment. Lena, ever pragmatic, suggested selling the house, but you, Marcus, refused. Oregon was supposed to heal you. You couldn't admit it was slowly killing everything else. And then came the night of the strange dream. You don't usually remember them. But this one, Lena was standing in the hallway, surrounded by light, whispering a word you couldn't quite catch. Her mouth moved, but there was no sound. When you woke, you felt a pang so sharp in your chest you thought it was the end. Instead, you survived. Barely. The next morning, Lena made tea. She hummed. You both pretended things were fine. You thought about asking her what she'd dreamed but didn't. That would have been August 2nd. On the morning of August 3rd, you found her on the couch. The cup was still warm. Her eyes were half open, staring past you at nothing. There were no signs of violence. No scream, no gasp, just absence. You tried CPR. You really did. The girls were asleep. The neighbors were still inside. You didn't call the ambulance right away. You sat there, cradling her, waiting for anything to explain it. When they did arrive, there wasn't much left to explain. She must have had a cardiac episode. One paramedic said, "That irony almost knocked you unconscious. I'm the one with the heart condition." You muttered, "Not her." The coroner wrote sudden cardiac arrest. The cause remained undetermined. The town responded with casseroles and condolences. The girls asked questions you didn't know how to answer. And you drifted. It's here that people began noticing the changes. The slow, deliberate withdrawal from your community. The way you stopped attending the card club. How you flinched when someone said Lena's name. But the strangest thing wasn't your mourning. It was how fast you moved on. Exactly 43 days after Lena's death, you married Miriam Foster. Now, to be fair, the timeline isn't technically illegal or even wildly unusual for the era. But socially, eyebrows were permanently raised. Miriam was everything Lena wasn't. Where Lena was sharp and skeptical, Miriam was gentle, pliant. Where Lena dissected formulas, Miriam collected porcelain angels and watched quiz shows with real enthusiasm. She was also wealthy, very wealthy. Widowed 3 years earlier, she lived alone in a hillside estate lined with hydrangeas and unspoken loneliness. You met her at a local card club. She smiled too much. You smiled too little. Somehow, you both made that work. Historians still argue whether Marcus truly loved Miriam or simply needed what she represented. Safety, stability, the insulation money provides when public sympathy runs out. The wedding was small, no family, just acquaintances. You wore the same tie you wore to Lena's funeral. No one commented, but several noticed. Margot noticed you hadn't seen her in years, not since Boston, not since the hotel room with the half-finished wine bottle and the broken lamp, not since Richard Heller was alive. When she walked into the church foyer that day, dressed like a widow but smiling like a spy, you felt your spine freeze. "Hello, Marcus," she said. "Didn't think I'd miss your big day." Did you? You remember what she smelled like: honeysuckle and hard liquor. Her eyes sparkled, but not with kindness. She didn't say anything else that day. But a month later, the police knocked on your door, and everything you thought was buried began clawing its way back into daylight. It begins with a knock. One of those polite, almost hesitant knocks, too restrained to be neighborly, too measured to be casual. You answer the door, still wearing your mourning robe, only half-shaved. Two men in plain suits, short haircuts, and expressions like cold toast are standing there. "Dr. Layton," you nod. "We'd like to ask you a few questions about a Mr. Richard Heller." The name hits your bloodstream like ice water. You grip the door frame and manage a tight-lipped, "Of course," because what else are you supposed to say? You invite them in, offer coffee out of habit, and they decline. They sit in your living room, the one Lena once decorated with woven pillows and knickknacks from antique stores you never liked. Miriam's tastes are cleaner, colder, less story, more showroom. You realize this only now. They ask about your time in Boston, about your time in Washington, about Richard, about Margot. You lie, of course. Not wild lies, just slight shifts in memory. The kind that blur edges and fill in missing pieces with softer ones. But these two aren't tourists. They're from the Washington State Cold Case Division, and they didn't drive 300 miles to reminisce. Turns out, Margot Heller has given them quite the story. She walked into a police station 2 weeks earlier, clutching a red scarf and shaking like she was rehearsing for a play. She said it all: how you met, how you loved her, how you convinced her to help kill her husband. Marcus told me exactly how to do it. She allegedly told the detective, "He handed me the syringe. He said it would feel like a flu shot, but I couldn't do it." According to her, you didn't hesitate. She described it in chilling detail. How you allegedly injected Richard with a paralytic agent, waited for his limbs to go still, and then gently, methodically placed a pillow over his face. You said he wouldn't feel a thing. When they ask you about it, You almost laugh, but it sticks in your throat. Because Margot's version is twisted but not implausible. That's what makes it dangerous. She knows your weak spots. She knows the drugs you once had access to. She knows how to spin motive, opportunity, and guilt into a neat little bow. And worst of all, she remembers things you'd rather forget. Historians still argue whether cold cases should lean heavily on testimonial evidence, especially when physical evidence is compromised or non-existent. But in 1969, forensic enthusiasm was on the rise, and exhumation science was making headlines, which is exactly what happens next. They exhume Richard Heller. Margot signs off on it. Her name is on the request. You're not even consulted. You only learn about it when the headline hits the Oregonian. Body of wealthy insurance agent dug up in homicide inquiry. Local doctor implicated. You nearly collapse in the kitchen. Miriam finds you staring at the toaster like it's about to confess something. You need to sit down, she says. You don't, because sitting down means admitting this is real. The forensic team in Washington is surprisingly efficient. Richard's body is disinterred, cleaned, and scanned. And somewhere in all that, they find what they're looking for. Hairline fractures along the hyoid bone and upper trachea, which, according to their expert, could be consistent with manual asphyxiation, or, as your lawyer later says, could also be consistent with digging up a body that's been dead for 3 years and hasn't exactly been aging gracefully. You try to keep your spirits up. Remind yourself that science isn't storytelling, that no one in their right mind would convict someone based on the brittle remains of a spine and the say-so of a woman who once keyed your car during an argument about tomato soup. But they do charge you with first-degree murder, no less. Margot, suddenly cast as a tragic widow duped by a charming doctor, gives interviews. She sits on the edge of talk show sofas and says things like, "I just want justice for Richard and for myself." You stop watching television altogether. Quirky fact: in the 1970s, court trials involving high-profile love triangles spiked in media coverage. Psychologists dubbed the trend sympathy theater, wherein the most composed witness, not the most truthful, tends to sway juries. You are not the composed one. You're spiraling. Miriam stands by you, hires the best defense team money can buy. They begin picking apart Margot's story, finding gaps, contradictions, dates that don't line up. Your lawyer, a short-tempered man named Elroy Fink, starts muttering, "This is a circus," before he's even seen a courtroom. And then you're there, in a Washington courtroom with sticky floors and a leaking air conditioner, staring across the aisle at Margot in pearls, tears pooling behind eyes that once told you they'd forgive anything. The trial lasts 9 days. Margot testifies for 3 of them. She cries. You flinch. The jury watches both of you like you're exhibits in a zoo. Your defense team brings in 2 forensic pathologists who argue that the damage to Richard's bones could easily have occurred during exhumation. They present charts, diagrams, even a pig skeleton for demonstration. Historians still argue whether that pig skeleton helped or hurt your case, but somehow it works. The jury deliberates for 17 hours, and then the verdict comes. Not guilty. A gasp from the gallery, a nod from the judge. You remember the feeling as almost weightless, like your feet were unzipped from gravity. But it doesn't last. Because while Washington sets you free, Oregon is just getting started. You don't get a parade. There are no balloons, no neighbors banging pots in celebration of your acquittal, just a return ticket home, a glass of lukewarm orange juice at the kitchen table, and Miriam asking, "What now?" You don't know. You'd barely caught your breath after the Washington trial. And now the Oregon DA has filed formal charges in Lena's death, second-degree murder. You blink at the paper like it's a bad translation. "But I was her husband," you whisper. "I loved her." Miriam doesn't respond. She just folds the indictment like a grocery list and slides it into the drawer beside the spare batteries and old warranties. And you stare out the window. It rains for 3 days straight. Historians still argue whether it's legal fairness or public pressure that drives follow-up prosecutions like this. You had just beaten 1 murder charge. Now another rolls up like a sequel no one asked for. The timing, suspicious. The motive, familiar. Money. The DA's office alleges you had increased Lena's life insurance policy a mere 16 days before her death. A new clause, a larger payout, and this is their favorite part: you were the sole beneficiary. You try to argue context. You'd just been through medical scares. You were a family with young kids. People adjust their coverage all the time, but it sounds hollow, especially when your heart condition. The very thing that was supposed to be your undoing became your accidental alibi. It wasn't you who died, it was Lena. The media latches on fast. One headline screams, "Doctor's wife dies." Suddenly was it a perfect prescription for murder, and that's how they frame it. Not tragedy, not misfortune. Calculated. You remember the morning the medical examiner's report arrived? Your defense team had been hoping for something vague, ambiguous enough to plant reasonable doubt. Instead, the forensics team had found a tiny injection mark on the upper back of Lena's hip, practically invisible. But not quite. More damning still, they identified metabolites in her system, residues of succinylcholine, a potent muscle-paralyzing agent. Rare, fast-acting, used in surgeries. You used to handle it every day. That particular lot number had expired 2 years earlier, but records showed it was part of the hospital's inventory back when you worked there. You had access. No one could prove you took it, but then again, no one could prove you didn't. Your lawyer slaps a pile of papers on the desk. "We can argue that it broke down post-mortem," he mutters, "or environmental contamination. Or hell, call in a pharmacologist who'll say it wasn't enough to kill a cat. But it's not just the drug, it's the timing. It's the marriage to Miriam 43 days later. It's Margot, still doing interviews, still dropping suggestive phrases like pattern of manipulation. It's how your story keeps shifting, just slightly, enough to make people lean in and whisper, why would he lie? Unless... And then, of course, there's the jury. You walk into the Oregon courtroom 6 months after your Washington acquittal, and the mood is not neutral. You can feel it in the way the bailiff avoids your eyes, the way reporters scribble before you even speak, the way the prosecutor opens with, "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you will hear about a man who understood chemistry, pressure points, and paralysis. He also understood grief, but only as a costume." Miriam squeezes your hand. Her pearls are too tight against her neck. She doesn't wear them again after that week. The prosecution's narrative is airtight. You increase the insurance. You were drowning financially. You had medical knowledge. You'd done it before. Wink to the Washington case, which they can't technically cite, but heavily imply. Their expert, a tall, silver-haired anesthesiologist with a voice like a sleepy violin, explains how succinylcholine works, how it paralyzes but leaves the mind alert if not dosed properly. How terrifying that would feel. He never says Lena's name, but every juror is picturing her awake inside her own body, heart slowing, lungs still. Your face, the last thing she saw. Your lawyer stands, tries to fight back. He points out the absence of a syringe, the lack of eyewitnesses, the flawed storage records. He even calls a fringe toxicologist who suggests the metabolites might have been misidentified entirely, could have been naturally occurring compounds interacting with decaying muscle tissue. Quirky fact. In the late 1960s, forensic toxicology was still in its adolescence. Gas chromatography had just started being used in criminal investigations, but protocols varied wildly between labs. Some samples degraded in transit, some were misfiled altogether. You cling to that maybe, just maybe, it was bad science. Sloppy labeling, confirmation bias, but juries don't want ambiguity. They want a clean story. They want a motive, a method, a monster. And on the 12th day of the trial, they find one guilty of second-degree murder. No gasps this time, just silence. Even Miriam doesn't move. She just lowers her head, as if the floor suddenly became fascinating. You don't cry. You don't speak. You just sit there, counting the heartbeat in your ears, wondering how your heart, so faulty, so fragile, can feel this full of fire. The sentencing is swift, 15 years, eligible for parole after 12, and just like that, the courtroom fades. The world shrinks. You, Marcus. Leighton. Once a man trusted with the edge of death, are now inmate 72605, a number stitched on a shirt you didn't choose. Living in a cell smaller than your childhood bedroom, eating food that tastes like wet cardboard and defeat. You don't get to grieve. You don't get to explain, you get 12 years. And a cot. 12 years. That's how long it takes for the concrete beneath your cell cot to memorize your weight. For the guards to stop saying your name and start saying, "Doc," not out of respect, just shorthand. Something easier to yell down the corridor when the lights flicker and someone needs stitching up. You enter prison like a man stepping onto a foreign planet. Oxygen feels different. Time drips instead of flows. Your white coat, your marriage, your entire past folded up and stored somewhere between your case file and the kitchen's dented aluminum trays. You expect anger, you expect fear. What you don't expect is boredom. It's not the kind you cure with crossword puzzles or pacing. It's a rot, a stillness that makes your thoughts louder than the clanging meal cart or the 3As. Shouting matches. You try to keep your mind sharp. You read, you write. Eventually, you start sketching diagrams of the human nervous system on scraps of paper towel, more for your own sanity than anything else. Word gets out that you were a doctor once, not a pretend one, a real one, with gloves, syringes, and degrees. And soon, cellmates start asking favors. "Doc, this tooth. It's killing me. Doc, can you look at this thing on my leg?" You give cautious answers. You're not licensed. You're not even trusted with plastic cutlery. But still, you can't help yourself. You explain what you can. Offer advice. Quirky fact. In the 1970s, many prisons had jailhouse doctors, inmates with medical backgrounds, or enough street knowledge to serve as unofficial medics. Some were actual ex-doctors. Others were just good at guessing. You, at least, were the real thing. And in here, that gives you currency. Not freedom, but leverage. You earn quiet favors, extra shampoo, a book someone forgot to return, a blanket that doesn't smell like mildew, but it also paints a target on your back. One night, a younger inmate approaches you, tattoos up to his neck, voice like gravel. He smiles, but not with his eyes. "Heard you know how to make people sleep." "Doc." You stare at him. He doesn't blink. "You know," he adds, "permanently." You say nothing, just walk away. You never see him again. Historians still argue whether prison rehabilitation is truly possible in facilities where survival comes before reflection. You don't bother debating it. You're too busy surviving. The worst moments aren't the fights or the cold. It's the birthdays. 12 birthdays missed. 2 daughters growing up without you. They send occasional letters, carefully filtered through the mailroom. You read them until the ink smears from your fingers. Then you stop replying, not because you don't love them, but because every word feels like a lie. You try to find rhythm. Wake, eat, read, write, sleep, repeat. Miriam visits once a month, always dressed as if she's going to court, not a prison. Hair pulled back, gloves in summer. She sits across the scratched plexiglass and says things like, "We're appealing again?" Or your lawyer thinks there's an angle. You just nod. She never asks if you did it. You never offer. Eventually, she starts bringing you drafts of the memoir. You need to write it down. She says, all of it. Not just for the appeal, for you, and so you do, on a clunky typewriter salvaged from a warden's closet, keys sticking every other sentence. You begin with the lines you can't stop repeating in your head. This was a trial that should have never taken place, a verdict that should never have been passed. The rest follows like a wound unspooling. You write at night. When the noise dies down, you smuggle memories out one paragraph at a time. You try to keep the anger at bay, though it sneaks in between the punctuation. You wonder what Lena would think of all this. If she'd laugh, or cry, or shake her head and call you a fool. Your fellow inmates start calling you the professor. One even claims to have read Gray's Anatomy, just to impress you. You both know he's lying, but you pretend it's true, because it's better than nothing. Prison libraries are underfunded, understocked, and always too cold. But you find treasures, old editions of The Lancet, chemistry textbooks from the 40s, even a romance novel where the heroine solves crimes with plant toxins. You read it 3 times. Quirky tidbit. The youth prison system has been the unexpected origin of several novels, some smuggled out by inmates who later became published authors. You like to think you're joining that strange tradition. 12 years is long enough for your body to forget what a mattress feels like, long enough for the world to change without you. One day, a guard tosses a newspaper through your bars. Look, he says, you made page 4. It's a profile piece. Convicted Dr. Penn's jailhouse memoir. A second life for a twice-accused man. You feel sick. Because it's working. The appeals board starts to listen, not to the book, but to Miriam's lawyers, to the inconsistencies, the borderline science, the missing chain of custody for one of the toxicology samples, and then, almost quietly, they grant you parole. 12 years served. You walk out of prison in a second-hand coat, holding a folder that contains your release papers, 3 rejection letters for job applications, and the final draft of your memoir. The sun hits your face like a slap. The air smells different. Miriam is waiting at the gate. So is a car. And a reporter, you don't answer questions. You just nod, climb in, and whisper, "Home?" But what is home now? A house full of silence. A memory shaped like Lena, a truth no one believes. You're not sure, but you do know this. You're free, and for the first time in over a decade, the question is no longer how long, it's what now? You ride in silence, the car humming like a tranquilizer. Miriam drives. Her hands are steady on the wheel, her eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. Though it's cloudy out and starting to drizzle, the road snakes along the Oregon coast, green cliffs, gray sky, the sea thrashing in the background like it's rehearsing for a storm. You sit in the passenger seat, the seatbelt oddly tight across your chest. You're thinner now. You've aged in corners of your body you didn't know existed. But Miriam hasn't changed. Or if she has, she wears it like perfume, something subtle, invisible, expensive. She glances at you only once during the entire drive. "Welcome back," she says. You want to say something clever. Something like, "Where exactly is back?" But the words stick. The house is still there. Same shingles, same lilac bushes out front. The door creaks in the same way Lena always meant to fix. You step inside, and everything's still suspended, like time paused to wait for you. And yet it isn't the same. Because this is Miriam's house now. She made it her own after your sentencing. New paint, new curtains, a glass dish of hard candy by the door. The ghosts have better manners here. They wait their turn. You head upstairs, past the guest room, past your daughter's old bedrooms, empty now, their childhood boxed and shelved. You stand at the threshold of the master bedroom. Miriam watches you, doesn't speak, just waits. You step inside. Lena's perfume is gone. So are her books, her bathrobe, her dented alarm clock with the missing 4-digit in their place. Pristine sheets, muted art, a minimalist lamp with a bulb that doesn't hum. You lie down on the edge of the bed like it might disappear beneath you. Miriam stands at the door. "I'll make tea," she says, and just like that, she's gone. Historians still argue whether spouses of convicted felons stay for love, loyalty, or leverage. In Miriam's case, you've stopped trying to guess. She's an enigma wrapped in cardigans and tact. She visited you every month, funded your appeals, published your memoir through her college roommate's small press, and yet she never asked what really happened. Maybe she didn't want the answer. Maybe she already knew. The next few weeks are molasses thick, slow, sticky, occasionally sweet, but mostly frustrating. You try to reintegrate. You apply for reinstatement of your medical license, knowing full well it won't be approved. You volunteer at a local hospice, where your name still draws long glances and short whispers. "You're that doctor," one nurse says, trying not to make it sound like an accusation. You just nod. You stop going after 2 days. One morning, Miriam finds you outside, barefoot in the dewy grass, staring at the garden hose like it's speaking in code. "You okay?" she asks. You shrug, trying to remember what it feels like to need something. She brings you back inside, makes oatmeal, opens the window. The fog rolls in again, relentless, familiar. You spend your afternoons reading reviews of your memoir. Some call it a chilling glimpse into the mind of a potentially innocent man. Others call it self-serving drivel. Your favorite review, strangely, comes from a true crime blogger who writes, "If Leighton is lying, he's brilliant. If he's telling the truth, then God help him because no one will believe it." You print that one out, tape it to your desk. You don't hear from your daughters. You don't blame them. But one night, you find a postcard tucked between 2 bills. No return address, just a beach and the words, "Still thinking about you." You stare at it for 20 minutes, then burn it in the fireplace. Quirky tidbit, the U.S. Postal Service doesn't require a return address. It's optional. And that little fact has probably fueled more mystery novels than any other bureaucratic decision in history. You start going for long walks along the coastline. The beach is eroding sand thinner, trees closer to the edge. A local historian once told you this town loses 6 inches of shoreline every year. At this rate, the past might slide into the ocean entirely. You walk past tourists who don't recognize you, past cafes that changed names, past the bench where Lena once spilled her coffee laughing too hard at a crossword clue. Medical villain with a needle. The answer was quack. You both thought it was hilarious. You start carrying a notebook again, not for medical notes, for thoughts, dreams, the kind you don't trust your memory to keep. In one entry, you write, "I didn't kill her, but I didn't save her either." You don't remember writing it. Miriam finds it, leaves it on your pillow with a highlighter mark under the word save. That night, she doesn't sleep in the same bed. The next morning, she makes pancakes, as if nothing happened. You keep going to the boathouse, the one with your old files, clippings, and yellowed photos. You sort them endlessly, not for meaning, just for movement, order, control. You used to believe in cause and effect, in dosage and reaction, in certainty. Now, you believe in fog. It covers everything eventually. It's just past 3 a.m. when you jolt awake drenched in sweat, heart galloping like it's trying to escape your chest. The room is dark, but not quiet. You hear it again, the low, rhythmic creak of the back porch swing. You know that sound? Lena used to sit there during summer nights, sipping tea with lemon and humming under her breath, as if the breeze needed company. But the swing was removed years ago. Miriam had it replaced with patio chairs, so either you're dreaming or something is wrong with the plumbing again. You don't investigate, you lie back and stare at the ceiling. You count the knots in the wood paneling. You listen to the sea crash faintly in the distance, like someone turning pages in a wet book. This happens more often now. The dreams, the noise, the sense of something unfinished breathing down your neck. You've returned to the edge of the world to forget, but the world hasn't forgotten you. And neither has Margot. You discover this when Miriam leaves the day's mail by your cereal bowl, just another envelope, no return address. But inside, a newspaper clipping from a regional crime digest. Margot's face stares back at you, older now, blurred with makeup and regret. The headline reads, "Margot Heller speaks. I told the truth. I stand by it." You laugh, not because it's funny, but because you'd forgotten how confidently someone could lie with that much eyeliner. The article summarizes her recent panel appearance at a true crime convention in Spokane. She was introduced as the woman who stood up to a murderer and lived. She apparently received a standing ovation. You put down your spoon. You stare at the photo. You mutter, "She always did love a spotlight." Historians still argue whether post-trial public appearances help or hinder the pursuit of justice. Victims' advocates say they humanize the case. Defense attorneys say they poison the well forever. You say nothing, but you do something you haven't done in months. You call your publisher. "I want to do a second edition." You say, "A new chapter," an afterword. Something to remind people that not all applause means truth. There's hesitation on the line, then polite interest, then a contract. So you sit down at your desk, the same desk Miriam had delivered from your old office. The wood still bears the coffee stain Lena once teased you about a ring that refused to sand out. You type. What happened in court is not what happened in life. And that's where it begins. You spend weeks writing, digging through court transcripts, highlighting phrases, quoting back inconsistencies. You even include a chapter titled "The Memory of a Molecule," a quiet meditation on how traces of succinylcholine can remain in tissue post-mortem, but also how forensic identification methods in 1966 were, at best, inconsistent, and at worst, performative. Quirky fact, succinylcholine was once considered a miracle drug in surgical settings, inducing muscle paralysis in seconds, but it had no antidote for years. If misused, it guaranteed a perfectly still corpse. You write this all plainly, calmly. You don't yell, you don't accuse, you just explain, again and again. Miriam reads it in silence one night. She doesn't finish the last page. Instead, she closes the manuscript and says, "Will it ever be enough?" You know what she means? She doesn't mean the book. She means this, the fight, the vindication, the hunger to be believed. You don't answer, because no, it won't. Later that week, you are invited to speak at a local bookshop, not a signing, just a reading. Quiet, intimate. The kind with folding chairs and instant coffee in paper cups. You sit in front of 9 people, one of whom is definitely there by accident and keeps checking her phone for a knitting group notification. You read a passage about Lena. The way she looked when she laughed so hard she hiccuped. The way she never left a room without straightening a picture frame. You stop mid-sentence. Not for dramatic effect, but because your throat tightens. And for a moment, you can't speak. You hear a chair squeak as someone leans forward, expecting more. But instead, you just whisper, "She didn't deserve this." And that's it. You close the book, thank everyone, walk out into the rain. You stand under a flickering street lamp and realize something you hadn't faced yet. Not really. Even if you didn't kill her, you destroyed her. Lena gave you years of her life, took your name, built a family with you, trusted you, and you repaid that trust with secrecy, detachment, maybe even betrayal. Because Margot didn't just invent her story out of nowhere. No, you were with her once, briefly, recklessly, selfishly, and even if you didn't commit murder, you committed something else. Something murkier. Something that cracked the glass long before the courtroom shattered it. You walk home without an umbrella, soaked through by the time you reach the door. Miriam hands you a towel, says nothing. You both watch water pool on the hardwood floor. You go to bed, but you don't sleep. Instead, you lie awake and think of a story you read once, buried in the back of a medical journal. A doctor in Argentina who treated a dictator during the Dirty War, kept him alive, didn't ask questions. Later, he said, "A scalpel has no morals. It only follows the hand that holds it." You wonder, were you the scalpel or the hand? You're standing in front of the boathouse again, wind in your ears, salt in your nostrils, and a headache forming just behind your right temple. The sun's pretending to come out today, flickering through the clouds like it's lost its confidence. You squint at the shingles, some of them missing now, the roof sagging like it knows your secrets. Inside, boxes, paper, dust. Years of memories packed into legal folders and manila envelopes that crackle when you touch them. You dig through them like an archaeologist of your own wreckage. Today, you're looking for something specific. The insurance policy. Lena's. You know it's in here. Somewhere between the sympathy cards and the medical board's letter of suspension, you want to find the original version before the increase, before the red ink, and the why now. Questions started. Because you remember something, a clause, a detail. You're not sure what, but it's been itching at the back of your mind ever since the book reading. A hunch wrapped in fog. After 40 minutes, you find it, folded twice, dated July 19th, 1966. Lena's signature is there. Your handwriting on the margin. Add-on for relocation coverage. That's it. That's what you forgot. You didn't increase the policy out of desperation. You did it because you were moving, restructuring your finances, rebalancing everything. And the relocation clause gave you an extra 10,000 in the event of a spouse's death due to natural causes while transitioning residence. A weird, niche clause offered to military families and those relocating for health reasons. You'd qualified under both. It's not exoneration, but it's something. You photocopy it, add it to your appeal file. Then you sit in the boathouse for another hour, just listening. The waves, the wind, the quiet tick of time. You think of Lena again. This time, not her laugh or her perfume, but the last moment you saw her alive. She'd said something so ordinary it now feels sacred. Don't forget to unplug the kettle. She was walking away, her hair still wet from the shower. There was a crossword on the coffee table. The answer to one who leaves no trace was phantom. Historians still argue whether mundane last words carry more psychological weight than dramatic ones. You'd argue they do because they're real, because they remind you that a person was living right up until the moment they weren't. Later that week, you get a letter in the mail, not typed, handwritten, no return address again. But this one isn't from your daughters, not from Margot. It's not even from a journalist. It's from a man named William Keyes. You vaguely remember the name. He testified briefly in your trial, a forensic assistant from the state lab, nervous, young, hands shaking like they were holding an invisible metronome. In the letter, he writes, "Dockety Layton, I've read your memoir. I need you to know something. During the toxicology analysis, a chain of custody form went missing, only for a day. but long enough for someone to raise an eyebrow. I flagged it. My supervisor told me not to worry. I've regretted not pushing harder. You might still be guilty. I don't know, but the process failed you. And I needed you to hear that before I retire. You reread the letter 5 times. Then you burn it, not out of anger, not out of guilt, just to see it disappear. Because for 12 years, you were told every piece of your case had been airtight, every lab report flawless, every protocol flawless, every assumption flawless. Now, a quiet admission of human error slips through the cracks like water in a basement. Quirky tidbit. In the 1960s and 70s, lab accreditation wasn't standardized across states. Some facilities had no oversight. Others ran on handshake ethics and overworked interns. Only in 1978 did the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors form an official certification body. You think about this as you walk the beach again. Low tide, sky like damp concrete. You notice, for the first time, a piece of driftwood shaped eerily like a syringe. You almost laugh. Then don't. At home, Miriam's in the living room, reading a gardening book. She doesn't look up when you come in. Can I ask you something? You say. She closes the book. You never asked if I did it. No, she says. I didn't. Why? She sets the book on her lap, looks at you like a museum exhibit. She's memorized every crack and scratch on, because I didn't need to. You stare. She continues. I married you knowing people wouldn't understand. I supported you, knowing I might never get answers. But I didn't need a confession. I needed consistency. And you've never changed your story. Not once. Not in 12 years. That's more than I can say for most men who just forget anniversaries. She smiles, faintly. Besides, she adds, if you did do it, God help me, I think you already regret it more than anyone could punish. You want to argue, but there's nothing left to argue with. You just sit down beside her, watch the rain, and for once, neither of you speaks. A month passes. You notice it in small ways first. How the leaves begin to change along the coast, darker reds this year, almost bruise-colored. How the cafe down the road swaps its chalkboard sign from peach scones to pumpkin muffins. How your knees ache a little more each morning, especially when the weather turns. And then you notice it in yourself. You're quieter, not in a peaceful way, more like someone walking barefoot in a dark hallway. You're waiting for something to jump out. It's not fear, not exactly. It's anticipation, and it arrives in the form of a phone call from a podcast producer named Sydney Crane. You almost don't pick up, but something about the number area code 206 pulls at your memory. Seattle. Dr. Layton. The voice says, crisp and casual. I know you're probably tired of all this, but we're doing a limited series on wrongful convictions. And your story, well, frankly, it's the holy grail. You stay silent long enough that she has to fill the air. I've read your memoir. Twice. I've gone through both trials. I've interviewed people who were there, and I think there's more story to tell. Not the courtroom stuff, the why behind it all. You murmur, there might not be a why. There's always a why, she says. She offers to come down. One weekend, no camera crew, just a mic, some questions, and a car full of audio gear. She wants the real you, not the court transcripts, not the editor's version. Just Marcus. You agree, against your better judgment, or maybe because part of you still hopes someone, somewhere, will believe you. Historians still argue whether the true crime boom of the 2010s and 20s helped illuminate injustice or simply turned grief into entertainment. You suspect it's both. You also suspect it doesn't matter. Sydney arrives on a Friday, mid-30s. Combat boots, oversized scarf, the kind of person who wears pens behind both ears and calls your boathouse deliciously haunted. You show her the files, the court documents, the faded photos of Lena. You don't give her access to everything, just enough to build a bridge. She sets up in your living room. 2 mics, 1 lamp, a bowl of lemon drops she picked up from a roadside market. For the throat, she says. You sit. She clicks record. And suddenly, there it is again, the whole ugly tale, pouring out of your mouth like old rainwater. Names, dates, the night Lena died, the trial, Margot, the hyoid bone. Sydney doesn't interrupt. She lets the silence stretch after each statement. You fill those silences because that's what you've always done. Because silence, to you, has never meant peace. It's meant accusation. Do you ever wonder, she asks softly, what your life would have looked like if none of this had happened? You think for a moment, then nod. I'd probably be working in a clinic, somewhere small, near the water, giving children stickers after checkups, coming home to Lena. Maybe we'd argue about dinner, or the crossword. Maybe we'd have grandkids by now. Maybe I'd have known peace. You stop. Adda. Or maybe I'd have died of heart failure in my 40s and been remembered fondly. Without the scandal, she smiles, tight-lipped. Do you miss her? You blink. Not because the question surprises you, but because it's the first time someone's asked it without loading it with suspicion. Yes, you say every day. You don't cry, but the words taste like salt. After she leaves, Sydney sends you transcripts. You edit some parts, clarify others, but overall, you let it stand. When the podcast launches a month later, it's called Echoes of the Needle. You hate the name, but you understand why she chose it. The third episode trends on Spotify. By episode 5, strangers begin mailing you letters again. Some say, we believe you. Others say, we still don't. One letter simply reads, the truth is rarely comfortable. Thank you for sitting in it anyway. Quirky fact, in 1976, a radio broadcast about a wrongly imprisoned man led to a national petition that ultimately overturned his conviction. It's widely considered one of the first successful media-driven legal reversals in U.S. history. You wonder if the same could happen for you, but it doesn't. Not yet. Instead, your parole officer calls. Just a heads up. He says, there's a reporter sniffing around your old neighborhood in Boston, asking about your childhood, about Lena. You sigh. Let them sniff, because what's left to protect? Later that night, you dig through your notes again. You find a Polaroid you'd tucked between 2 files, Lena, holding your youngest daughter on a windy beach. Her hair's a mess. Her smile isn't. You carry it to the kitchen and pin it to the fridge. Miriam sees it in the morning. She says nothing, just makes toast. You wonder if she's forgotten how to ask, or if she simply doesn't want to disturb whatever fragile balance you've built. She leaves later that afternoon to visit her sister, says she'll be gone 3 days. You wave from the porch like everything's normal. Then, you go back inside and listen. The house creaks. The fridge hums. Outside, a seagull caws once, then vanishes. You're alone, just you, and Lena's picture, and the endless hum of a story that refuses to end. You wake in the middle of the night with the distinct sensation that someone's moved your things. The photo on the fridge, it's skewed. The mail on the hallway table has shifted. The draft of your second edition manuscript, which you left stacked neatly by the bookshelf, is fanned out pages loose, like a deck of guilt being reshuffled. But you're alone. You check the locks, the windows, even the boathouse, which is just as you left it, papers curling at the edges, that familiar ocean damp eating its way into the walls. You try not to think too hard about it. Maybe you moved them. Maybe you forgot. Maybe ghosts do exist, and they don't like poor filing systems. Still, the unease lingers. You spend the next morning drinking black coffee in Lena's old mug, the one with the faded caduceus and the chip in the handle. You've kept it all these years. Even after Miriam started phasing out the clutter, you trace the chip with your finger. You think about all the moments in life that hinge on the tiniest details. The wrong word, the wrong timing, the wrong dosage, and, inevitably, the wrong people. That afternoon, you receive another letter. This one does have your return address. Seattle. An apartment complex. The envelope is thick, the paper expensive. Inside, a typed letter. No signature. I need to speak with you. Not for closure. For correction. I said something in court that wasn't true. I omitted something. Maybe I twisted something. I don't know anymore. I was scared of what you'd done, of what I'd done. If you're willing to listen, come to Seattle. Please. M. You don't need a decoder ring. M is Margot. Historians still argue whether post-conviction admissions by key witnesses should trigger automatic retrials. In practice, they rarely do. Too messy, too political, too embarrassing for the system to say, oops, you read the letter 3 times. You don't call your lawyer. You don't call Miriam. You book a bus ticket because some part of you, against all better judgment, wants to hear her voice again. Not because you trust her, but because you don't trust yourself not to. The ride to Seattle is long, damp, and filled with that particular melancholy that settles in the windows of Greyhound buses. You watch the landscape blur, mist-covered evergreens, shuttered diners, gas stations that sell more lotto tickets than fuel. You wonder if Margot's hair is still red. You wonder if she still smells like honeysuckle and hard liquor. You wonder if this is a trap. When you arrive, she's waiting, not at the bus station, but at the cafe 2 blocks away. You spot her through the window before you enter. She hasn't seen you yet. Her hair's darker, shorter. Her posture's changed, less seductive, more armored. She's wearing reading glasses and a raincoat that doesn't fit quite right. But it's her, no doubt. You step inside. She looks up. She doesn't smile. "Marcus," she says, as if tasting the word. You sit. There's a pause. Then she sighs. "Let's not pretend," she says. "We're not old lovers. We're not enemies. We're not even characters in the same play anymore. We're something else." You nod. She slides a small envelope across the table. Inside, a photocopy of a document. It's her original statement to the police, dated, signed, and different. "Read the second paragraph," she says. You do. In this version, she claims she never saw you inject Richard. She says you handed her the syringe. Yes, but that she panicked and left the room. When she returned, Richard was dead. She assumed you had done it. She told the police she'd seen it because she thought her assumption was enough. She made it sound certain. When it wasn't. "I told them I watched you do it," she whispers. "But I didn't. I never did. I just assumed. I wanted it to be over. I wanted someone to say, yes, that was murder. So I could stop wondering if I'd helped kill my husband, or if I just watched him die of some freak accident while I stood in the kitchen shaking like a leaf." You stare at the paper. It's real, but it's not signed. "Why show me this now?" you ask. "Because I'm tired of living like a ghost," she replies. "And because watching you on that podcast, I saw something I didn't expect." "What?" "Doubt. Not about your innocence. About your certainty. It made me realize I'm not the only one who's never really known what happened. You want to scream, or laugh, or stand up and walk into traffic. But instead, you just sip your cold coffee. "Do you want to recant?" you ask. "I don't know," she says. "I wanted to, then I didn't. Now, I just needed you to know." You leave the cafe 2 hours later with no promise, no signature, no resolution. But you do leave with something new, an echo. Because Margot, the one person who destroyed your life, just admitted she's not even sure what she saw. And that changes everything. Quirky tidbit. There's a legal term for this kind of moment. Recantation-induced reasonable doubt. It rarely works. Juries prefer their stories tidy, but occasionally, it cracks things open. You return to Oregon with that document in your pocket. You don't call the DA, not yet. Instead, you sit on your porch with a blanket and Lena's mug, and you wonder, if a lie led to a verdict and a truth followed it, which one lasts longer? You spend the next few days pacing. Not metaphorically, literally. Floorboards creak under your heels as you walk the same 10 paces across the living room. Back and forth, wearing a groove into both the hardwood and your thoughts. You should feel triumphant, vindicated. Maybe, instead, you feel something closer to nausea. Because Margot's confession, her almost confession, isn't a key. It's a suggestion, a maybe, a ripple. Not a wave. And in the cold, unforgiving architecture of the legal system, maybe is just a dressed-up version of still guilty. You stare at the copy of her unsigned statement. You run your fingers over the indentation of the type. You think of all the people who stood in court, looked you in the eye, and saw only what they wanted to see. Motive, method, malice. Not a man, not a husband, just a headline with a heartbeat. Historians still argue whether the human brain is equipped to handle conflicting narratives about a single person. We like our villains sharp and tidy. We like our victims broken and still. Gray areas make us uncomfortable. They require too much thinking, so you stay in your groove, back and forth, trying to decide whether to send the document to your lawyer. In the end, it's Miriam who does it. She finds the envelope on your desk, reads it, quietly places it on the kitchen table, and without asking your permission, she copies it and mails it registered, certified, signature required to your attorney. You don't argue, you just say, "That wasn't your choice to make." She replies, "Neither was Lena's death. You don't speak to her for 2 days. But on the third, you find fresh coffee waiting in your favorite mug. The silence breaks, not with words, but with toast and butter and a mutual refusal to revisit the moment. Meanwhile, your attorney calls. He sounds exhausted. This document is helpful, he says, but it's not definitive. You expected that. She didn't sign it. He continues. It doesn't change the verdict, but it opens a door. Technically, a door to what? To review. Maybe even a rehearing, but that's uphill. No guarantee. And frankly, the DA will fight it. Should I go public? He hesitates. Then, let's hold off for now. So you wait. Again, quirky fact. In 1974, a convicted man in California was exonerated after a key witness recanted her testimony on live television. The court dismissed the original charges only after 2 more corroborating witnesses came forward. One confession rarely opens the floodgates, but it can tap the pipe. You begin preparing, just in case. You re-review the autopsy. You re-examine the toxicology. You re-watch the podcast episodes and listen to how your voice changes when Lena's name comes up. You sound not guilty, but not innocent either. You sound haunted. You take long walks down the beach, your coat buttoned to the chin. The salt air doesn't heal, it just peels away more layers. You wonder if maybe you'd feel lighter if the truth were clearer. Because, deep down, even you don't know where the line is anymore. You remember everything up until the moment Lena's tea spilled, and then nothing. Nothing useful. Anyway, she'd said she was tired. She'd said she had a headache. You offered her a warm compress. She refused. Then she curled up on the couch and never moved again. That's what you told the police. That's what you wrote in the memoir. That's what you told yourself. But what if she had complained about her chest? What if she had said something about feeling strange? What if you missed the signs? What if you did administer something small, something gentle, something you thought would help? Historians still argue whether memory is an accurate reflection of the past or just a story we tell ourselves to stay upright. Cognitive scientists call it memory reconsolidation. The idea that every time we recall something, we reshape it. Like wet clay? What? Exactly. Did you shape? One night, you find yourself in the kitchen with the lights off. The photo of Lena on the fridge glows faintly in the moonlight through the window. You speak aloud, barely a whisper. Did I fail you? The fridge hums. Outside, the wind picks up. No answers, only air. The next morning, your attorney calls again, this time with news. The Innocence Project. Yes, that one has agreed to review your case. They can't promise anything, but they're intrigued. They want to see the full transcript, original lab results, and your correspondence with Margot. You agree. Cautiously, it feels surreal. You, Marcus Layton, convicted and released but never cleared, are now officially under review. It doesn't mean you're innocent, but it means you might be, at least on paper. Miriam reacts with a gentle nod. I didn't think we'd ever see this day. She says, you don't say what you're thinking. Neither did I, and I'm not sure I deserve it. Because that's the catch, isn't it? Even if the court finds you innocent, even if the system says, oops, we got it wrong, even if the record is erased, you still remember the tea, you still remember the silence, you still remember the look on your daughter's faces when they were told, you still carry Lena's ghost in every room, and some stains, some very specific, very surgical stains don't come out, not even with time. You never thought a man could lose sleep over hope, but that's exactly what's happening now. The Innocence Project sends a letter, a real one, with a watermark and legal disclaimers and signatures you can't pronounce. It says, we are conducting an independent forensic review in coordination with our experts. You stare at that sentence for 20 minutes. You memorize the font. You fold the paper into eighths and tuck it into your wallet like it's a talisman. And then just like that, you're back to waiting. But this wait feels different. This one itches. You start sleeping with the lamp on again, not because you're scared of the dark, you're scared of dreams. Lena shows up more often now, not in dramatic visions, but in tiny, haunting cameos. She sits at the edge of your bed. She rearranges the silverware drawer. She hums that lullaby you never learned the name of. And you wake up whispering things you hope no one hears. 3 weeks later, you receive a visit. Not from lawyers, not from journalists, from your eldest daughter. She calls first, her voice trembling across the line like it's not sure it belongs in your ear. Hi, Dad. You freeze. Everything stops air, blood, breath. Hi, you croak back. She doesn't offer much. Just says she's passing through. Just says she'd like to talk. Maybe just for coffee. Maybe not even that. You say yes. Of course. You spend the next 24 hours cleaning a house that hasn't been messy in years. You even trim the hydrangeas. She arrives on a Tuesday, hair shorter than you remember, wearing a jacket that Lena once tried to buy but never did. She stands in your doorway for a long time before stepping in. Neither of you cries. That comes later. For now, there is tea and a living room with too many unspoken things in the air. I listened to the podcast, she says, after the second cup. All of it. You brace. I don't know what I expected, but you sounded tired. You nod. I was. She sets down her cup. You still are. Neither of you speaks for a while. Then, did you do it? She asks, with the gentleness of someone placing a fragile object back on a shelf. You close your eyes. I don't think so. You say, but that doesn't mean I didn't fail her. She leans back, eyes glossy, but dry. You were gone for so long. I didn't know how to grieve. I didn't know who to grieve. I know. You whisper. You were my dad. And then you weren't. The room feels small now, like the walls are tensing. Can I ask you something? You say. She nods. Do you remember what she was like that last summer? Anything strange? Did she seem tired or ill? She hesitates. No, but I was a kid. I was busy with school, camp. I didn't notice much back then. You nod. Of course. What child notices their mother's heartbeat? She hugs you when she leaves. Not long, not tight, but real. You close the door and sit down and cry for the first time in years. Because you don't realize how long you've been carrying shame until someone gives you permission to set it down even for a minute. The Innocence Project reaches out again. They've reviewed the toxicology. Their expert, a woman named Dr. Amita Varghese, has questions. She believes the original report didn't account for post-mortem redistribution, a phenomenon where certain drugs migrate in the body after death, creating false positives or misleading concentrations. Succinylcholine is especially volatile. It can metabolize so rapidly it becomes untraceable within minutes, unless, as in Lena's case, trace metabolites bind with certain muscle groups. Dr. Varghese explains that the metabolite reported in the original finding was not definitively linked to succinylcholine. The lab in 1966 used a generalized muscle relaxant marker. It could have been anything from anesthesia residue to over-the-counter antihistamines interacting with decomposition. In short, the smoking gun might have been a rusty BB. Your lawyer calls with a new tone in his voice. You've got a shot? He tells you they're preparing a motion for post-conviction relief. Not an appeal, not a retrial, but a formal request to vacate the conviction based on new scientific evidence. Historians still argue whether the legal system is built to admit its own fallibility. Some judges treat wrongful convictions like cracks in a mirror, things to be covered, not fixed. But some still believe in repair. You're too cautious to hope yet, but you buy a new suit just in case. 2 weeks later, a judge agrees to hear your motion. It's not a full hearing yet, just a review of the application, but it's more progress than you've had in decades. You call Miriam, she's at her sister's still. When you tell her the news, she doesn't say congratulations. She says, are you ready for what comes next? You ask, what do you mean? If they clear your name, she says, what do you become? You don't know, because being innocent again doesn't bring Lena back. It doesn't erase the years you lost. It doesn't restore your license or your family or the part of you that once whistled while boiling tea. It just means the world might stop calling you a killer. And that's not the same as being whole. Quirky fact. In a 2005 psychological study, wrongfully convicted individuals reported lower self-worth after exoneration than while incarcerated. Turns out, living with accusation is painful. But living with survivor's guilt can be worse. You hang up with Miriam and go outside. The wind carries the scent of low tide and pine needles somewhere in the dark. An owl calls once and then goes quiet. You whisper to no one, I'm still here, not guilty, not innocent, just Here, the courthouse hasn't changed much. Same chipped brick, same pigeons loitering like unpaid interns, same wooden bench out up front where your lawyer used to smoke half a pack before trial began. You walk past it now in your new suit navy blue, a little stiff at the shoulders, and feel the strangest thing. Not fear, not even defiance, just fatigue. The kind that settles in your bones when you've told the same story too many times to too many people who weren't really listening. Miriam joins you on the courthouse steps. She's wearing her pearls again, the same ones from your trial, the same ones you thought she'd stopped wearing. You nod at each other. Nothing more needs to be said. Inside, the courtroom smells like lemon-scented cleaner and history. You remember every crack in the ceiling tiles, every creak in the floorboards. Your lawyer meets you at the door and says, "Judge Ramirez is presiding." She's meticulous. You already knew that. Historians still argue whether meticulous judges are more likely to overturn convictions or less likely to admit the system made a mistake. The data is inconclusive. You don't bother guessing anymore. You just straighten your tie and sit quietly at the defense table. This isn't a full trial. There's no jury, no cameras, no Margot, no drama. Just a hearing, a motion, a chance. Your lawyer presents Dr. Varghesi's report first. Her credentials sparkle. Tenured toxicologist, consultant for 3 federal investigations, published in 4 international journals. She isn't here in person, just a written affidavit. In it, she outlines, in calm, scientific language, that the metabolites found in Lena's system were misclassified, that the test used was outdated, that it's no longer considered medically reliable in determining cause of death related to neuromuscular agents. The judge listens. She takes notes. She doesn't interrupt. Then comes the forensic pathologist. This one does appear in person. He walks through the exhumation photos. He points out inconsistencies in the bruising that the original prosecution used as evidence of injection. He explains how post-mortem skin slip can create microabrasions that mimic puncture wounds. He's not flashy, but he's thorough. Your lawyer adds Margot's letter to the record, still unsigned, still legally toothless, but part of the story. Then, silence. The judge asks only one question. If we vacate this conviction, what do you want to happen next? Dr. Layton. You swallow. I don't know. You say honestly, I don't want a parade. I don't want money. I just want it to be over. She nods, takes the files, adjourns. It will be weeks before a ruling is issued. You step outside into the fading afternoon sun. Miriam offers you a mint from her purse. You take 2 back home. You return to the boathouse. You've started organizing everything into labeled binders. Trial 1, Trial 2, Appeals, Prison, Podcast. It's a personal museum of your own unraveling and maybe, just maybe, your reconstruction. You open a drawer labeled Lena. Inside, her handwriting. Notes she left on the fridge. Grocery lists. A torn envelope with the recipe scribbled on the back for lentil soup you always said you hated and secretly loved. You read it again. She'd written, add more time than you think. Always more time. You smile. That night, you dream again. Lena's there, sitting at the kitchen table, stirring tea. She doesn't speak, just looks at you and tilts her head like she's waiting. You sit across from her, and for once, you don't apologize. You just sit, because maybe that's what the living owe the dead, not guilt, not penance, just presence. Weeks pass. The judge's decision arrives in a white envelope marked confidential. You open it with trembling hands. You read the first line. The court hereby vacates the conviction of Dr. Marcus Layton on the grounds of newly discovered scientific evidence that significantly undermines the reliability of the original forensic conclusions. You read it twice, 3 times. Then you sit down, not from shock, from release. You're still not declared innocent, but you're no longer officially guilty. Your conviction is gone, like a name being lifted from a wall. The news doesn't hit the front page. It doesn't trend on Twitter. It shows up in a 3-paragraph blurb in the Oregonian. Conviction vacated in decades-old murder case. No quotes, no interviews, no outrage, just a whisper in a loud world. Miriam takes you out for dinner, not to celebrate, just to eat. You order soup. She doesn't ask what kind. You don't tell her. It's lentil. You walk home slowly. She takes your arm, not because you need help, but because you both want to feel something solid again, something real. Later that week, Sydney from the podcast calls. She's ecstatic. Marcus, she says, this changes everything. We need a follow-up, a mini-series, a book, an HBO. You cut her off. No, you say gently. But people need to know. They know enough. She pauses. Then, what do you want? You think? I want to go to sleep and not dream about trial transcripts. She gets quiet. Fair enough. You hang up. Then you walk down to the beach. The fog's rolling in. The wind's picking up. You stare out at the waves and realize this is what freedom feels like. Not justice, not redemption, but air and space and silence that finally means peace. The house is still, not the tense, holding its breath kind of stillness from the years you spent under suspicion, but a softer kind, a hush that doesn't ask for anything. That lets you exist. You keep waking up before dawn, but now you don't mind. You make coffee slowly. You watch the fog lift from the trees like a curtain being pulled back. You let the day arrive without trying to get ahead of it. Some days you don't write at all. Other days, you scribble half thoughts into your notebook. Nothing dramatic, just phrases that come to you while peeling apples or refiling old papers. She deserved more time. Truth changes shape in rearview mirrors. Not all silence is shame. You haven't spoken to Margot since the cafe. You don't think you will again. She was part of the story, but not part of the ending. The Innocence Project sends one last letter. Thank you for your cooperation, your trust, your patience. It's a form letter, but someone scrawled a personal note at the bottom in blue ink. What they took from you doesn't define you. What you did with it does. You tape it to the inside of your desk drawer. It's mid-autumn now. You go out walking in a scarf Lena once knitted. You wear it like armor, like memory. You see your reflection in a shop window and hardly recognize the man tired. Yes, but steady, maybe even real again. One morning, your younger daughter calls. She doesn't mention the podcast, or the conviction, or even the ruling. She just asks what kind of pancakes you used to make. You laugh. Tell her. Buttermilk, slightly burned, too much cinnamon. She laughs, too. You ask if she'd like to come visit. She says she'd like that. You don't hang up right away. Neither of you do. The next day, you cook breakfast for yourself. One plate, one fork, one napkin. You sit by the window, watching gulls fight over nothing. And you think about Lena, not just how she died, but how she lived. How she snuck radish seeds into the flower beds just to annoy the neighbors. How she could quote Plath and then misquote Star Trek 5 seconds later. How she would have hated everything that came after her, but probably would have found it all morbidly fascinating. You once said her laugh could shatter glassware. You miss that laugh more than you miss your career, more than you miss the man you used to be. But you're starting to believe that missing isn't the same as guilt, and guilt isn't the same as truth. You place her photo back on the fridge, not tucked behind the receipts, not angled away from Miriam, right there in the center. So you see it every time you reach for the milk. Miriam doesn't comment. She just sets down a slice of toast beside your plate, and that's it. That night, you sit at the edge of the dock. No boathouse tonight, just stars, water, and the soft creak of rope on wood. You take a breath. You let it out slowly. You say, aloud, to no one, I didn't kill her. Then, quieter, but I wish I'd saved her. You let the tide answer, and finally, it doesn't feel like judgment. It feels like forgiveness, or something near it. So now, your feet are cold on old wooden boards, and the wind is soft again. Softer than it's been in years. The sea behind you keeps rolling, not loud, not demanding, just steady, like it's always been there. Like it'll outlast every question you ever asked. The house lights are still on, casting a glow across the grass. You know that when you head back in, the kettle will whistle gently. The mugs will be warm in your hands. The silence, for once, won't be heavy. And you'll sleep. Not because everything is fixed, not because the world bent toward justice just in time, but because there's nothing more to tell. Not tonight, not now. You've walked through the trial, through the fog, through the shadows people made out of headlines and half-truths. You've stood in the ruins of your reputation, of your marriage, of your past, and you've stayed standing. You know more than most that truth doesn't always come like a gavel. Sometimes it arrives like a letter with no return address. A visit, a whisper, a cup of tea made for one. So now, let the lights dim. Let the air settle. Let the echoes hush. You've reached the end of this long and winding story. And whether you believe Marcus Layton or not, It's time to sleep.